Good morning, everybody. Today we're going to look at our very last new lesson for this semester about quadratic formula. So yesterday we were talking about the discriminant, and it helps us to know how many solutions a particular quadratic equation is going to have, but it doesn't tell you what they are. All right, so we know that if ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, so if we have our equation, our quadratic equation in standard form and equal to 0, our discriminant helps us know whether it has one real solution, two real solutions, or no real solutions. The quadratic formula actually finds the solution. And the cool thing about the quadratic formula is that as long as it's in standard form and equal to 0, like up here, it always works. Okay, sometimes factoring doesn't work. It's a great method. It's fast. It's useful for a lot of things, but it doesn't always work. Quadratic formula will always work. Let's look at a couple examples. But first, the quadratic formula says to find the values for x. We're going to do the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And again, notice right here, this part right here is the discriminant. So we use the discriminant as part of our solving. So let's look at a couple examples. All right, so our first one here, we want to solve 3x squared plus 8x minus 3 equals 0. So again, it's in standard form and it equals 0. That's super important. Just like yesterday, we want to identify our a, our b, and our c. So a is 3 because it's in front of x squared. B is 8. It's in front of x. And c is negative 3 because that minus sign makes that 3 negative. So now to find my x's, I'm just going to plug it into my formula. Now the opposite of b here means that I just want to take b and change the sign. So since it's positive 8, I'm going to write negative 8 plus or minus the square root of b squared. And remember, we always want to put that in parentheses. Minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. Now, the next thing that's real important is order of operations. So when I simplify this, the first thing I want to make sure I do is I'm going to do the part under the square root first. So over here in my calculator, I'm going to do 8 squared minus 4 times my a times my c. All right, so my number is 100, and remember that is also my discriminant. So now what I have is I have negative 8 plus or minus the square root. I got 100 underneath that square root. And then I usually like to simplify this bottom part. 2 times 3 equals 6. You can do it later if you want. I like to do it right away. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to take the square root. And I find that students do better if they simplify underneath first and then take the square root. So the square root of 100, you might already know what that is. It's 10. So now we have negative 8 plus or minus 10 divided by 6. Now this is how we're going to get our two solutions. Okay, because first we're going to do negative 8 and add 10 and divide by 6. And then we're going to do negative 8 minus 10 divided by 6. This might remind you of what we did when we used square roots to solve algebraically. All right, the last thing I need to make sure you know is that you have to simplify the top first and then divide by 6. So I'm going to do negative 8 plus 10. That's 2. 2 divided by 6. Great if you reduce your fraction. If you forget, it's okay. So one of my answers for x is 1/3. Here, negative 8 minus 10, that equals negative 18 divided by 6. So my second answer is negative 3. Let's try another one. So here I have 0 equals x squared minus 7x plus 4. All right, here's a quadratic formula so that we don't forget it. All right, now, a couple things. First of all, notice that since it's just x squared, a is going to be 1 because it's 1x squared. B is negative 7 because that minus sign makes the 7 negative. and c is positive 4. So now we have x equals, this time, since b is negative 7, the opposite of b becomes positive 7, plus or minus the square root, b squared minus 4 times a times c, all over 2a. We have 7 plus or minus the square root. Now I'm going to use my calculator. So I'm going to do parenthesis negative 7 squared minus 4 times 1 times 4, and it gives me 33. I do want to show you what happens if you forget the parenthesis. If I do just negative 7 squared minus 4 times 1 times 4, oops, all right, notice my calculator gives me a different answer, and that's because in the bottom equation, it's squaring 7 and then making it negative as opposed to doing negative 7 times negative 7. So that top one is the correct one. So always use that parenthesis. All right, all over 2. All right, now depending on your purpose, you might want to leave it with the square root. I am going to use a decimal because when we're trying to find an answer on your graph, it's helpful to have the decimal. So I'm going to do the square root of 33, which is about 5.7. So we have 7 plus or minus 5.7 divided by 2. All right, now we're going to get our two answers. 7 plus 5.7 divided by 2, and 7 minus 5.7 divided by 2. When I add 7 plus 5.7, I get 12.7 divided by 2. 12.7 divided by 2 is 6.35. So one of my solutions is 6.35. Here, 7 minus 5.7. Oops. Is 1.3, and then I'm going to do 1.3 divided by 2. So notice I always hit enter first, so 0.5. Now, if you want to check your answers, remember what we're looking at on a graph is where the y value equals 0. So this would be on the answers on the x-axis. You can always check by graphing it using Desmos. Okay. Very last example. Y equals 4x squared minus 20x plus 25. So notice that a is 4, b is negative 20, and c is 25. Now, if you want, you could press pause now and try this yourself, and then check your answer with me in a minute. So to get x, we're going to do the opposite of b. So since b is negative 20, I'm going to write positive 20, plus or minus the square root, b squared minus 4 times a times c, all over 2 times a. Okay. I'm going to get everything set up here, and I'm going to use the calculator to work under the square root. So parenthesis negative 20 squared minus 4 times 4 times 25. And notice the answer is 0. Okay. Now, the square root of 0 is 0, and we know that because 0 times 0 is 0. So notice what's going to happen when I find my two solutions. When I do 20 plus 0 divided by 8, I get 20 divided by 8. You could leave that as a fraction. You could reduce it to 5 halves, or you could write it as a decimal, 2.5. Okay, all those answers are correct. Notice when I do 20 minus 0 divided by 8, I get the same thing, 20 divided by 8. So what happens is I only get one answer because they're the same. And that's why when your discriminant is 0, this part under the radical, we always say there's one real solution. If I graph this using Desmos, what I would see is that on the x-axis, where y is 0, there's only one answer. And that's what's going to happen is, oops, switch colors again. If you graph this one, what's going to happen is that the only way it's going to get one answer is if it's touching right on the x-axis at the vertex. Then you're only going to get one answer. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to submit a copy of your notes and then use this to help you with your assignment tomorrow. Have a great day.